right, welcome everybody to this episode of Freedom Hub Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. We are sponsored by your Freedom Hub, and we are the Center for Disruptors in the World. We're going to have another exciting episode as usual again today. We do want you to be aware of the fact that these episodes are all being recorded. You're also welcome to register or share this with others so they'll get a notice every week when a new episode is going to be appearing. You can come and see them live. And over the weekend, typically by the end of the day, Sunday, they're posted at all of these popular channels. They are case sensitive, so as you make a note of them, please make sure you capitalize accordingly. Now, just to give you a quick diversion before we jump into today's topic, as I said, we are sponsored by your Freedom Hub, and as one channel, just to give you a flavor, there's a wealth of information on these various videos, and you'll certainly get a big kick out of watching those as we go forward. Now today, though, we do have a great little guest because lo and behold, everybody is a bit locked up at home at the moment. And so we really wanted to kind of share some really important topics and things you can do to kind of fill in that gap. So Charles, if you'll do the honors.
Sure, Jeff, and Brittany, welcome. I met Brittany back in the 2000s when she was putting some video together on some specific liberty projects for a think tank in Maryland, specifically regarding a family struggling to get their kid into a better public school and how they were stymied by the local school board bureaucracy. And then we interviewed a couple other politicians along the way at the legislature and the governor himself. And I didn't really stay in contact with Brittany until more recently in the health freedom area. But way back, she was a contributor for the Wall Street Journal, its Asian division. She is the daughter of a fairly well-known libertarian philosopher, Butler Shaffer, who did pass away recently. So Brittany, our hearts go out to you for that. Lately, over the past few years, she's become an author, writing Urban Yogini for adults and older kids, and then more recently, Annabel, Pickering, and the Sky Pirates. And while we scheduled this webinar a while ago, with the pandemic recession, all these webinars coincidentally have become even more relevant because, as Jeff alluded, so many of us are stuck at home with our kids, and we're having to become homeschool parents, and it's really a struggle because most of us still are working remotely at this point and not really sure how to spend time teaching our kids. So this is timely, some books that teach liberty. So that's our intro, Jeff.
Very, very nice. Okay, well, Brittany, we're excited to find out what you...
I'm just going to present about teaching liberty through literature at a time when it's most necessary. So as homeschooling families, I've been homeschooling for many years, our daughter who has special needs, and just a few years ago, we started with our son. So, sheltering at home isn't that different for us than it normally is. Homeschooling families like to integrate what's going on in the world around us as much as possible with what we're teaching. So I feel that what's going on right now is, an awesome opportunity to do that. There's so much to see, and especially in the realm of the workings of our society, of government, economics, and also just in how ordinary people outside of government and outside of institutions really pull together to help each other. So as homeschooling parents, which is now a lot more of us, how do we help our children to understand what's going on around them? And at the same time, help them to gain an appreciation for the values of liberty when those values are really under direct assault right now. I just wanted to mention some resources that we use that I've been really happy with. There's a lot more, but the Ron Paul curriculum is awesome. Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom, also fantastic, especially for history. Fee.org has a lot of videos, articles, some of which are perfectly, some are more for an older audience, some are for younger kids. Mises.org, more for teens and older, and adults. And Bob Murphy, his book, Lessons for the Young Economist. So there's a lot of stuff out there. I just wanted to mention a few of these. But as important as this education is, I believe that what's really important is sort of the fundamental values that underpin our views on liberty and how people live together, our society, how we're organized. And I think those values really don't come from learning, from education. They don't come from rational discussion. They come from how we see people acting around us, how we see people interacting, treating the people around them, and also the stories that we tell and the stories we listen to, the mythologies that become a part of us. Those aren't things that, you know, we get from our high school civics class. It's things that we get from the stories that we listen to. So that's sort of what I've tried to do with my books. The danger, of course, is, you know, when you're writing fiction about liberty, how do you do that without sounding preachy or without just being, you know, as bad as the other side, just being propagandistic? And so my approach is, first of all, just be honest. Don't misrepresent the other side, and don't dismiss their concerns. Be honest about, you know, their best case scenario and work with that. But most importantly, you do it by telling a good story, by creating a world that pulls readers in and characters that they really care about, and hopefully a plot that's intriguing and keeps them moving. So I hope that that's what I've done with my books, the Urban Yogini series, of which there are 2 now, and the Annabel Pickering series, of which there's only 1 so far. The next one's coming. And, you know, obviously I'm not the one to judge that. That'll be up to the readers to decide. So what I'm going to do is I'll just briefly go through, I just want to give a taste of what my books are about and who they might be appropriate for. And then if anyone has questions, you know, I can answer questions. So Urban Yogini. Urban Yogini is a superhero who can't use violence. That's her right there. This is appropriate for teens, maybe some older kids, but there is violence in it, regardless of what the title says. There's violence and there are a few graphic images, so it's definitely not for younger kids. So a young woman takes up yoga and gains superpowers when her pranic force is released, but she's bound by the law of ahimsa, meaning that she cannot cause harm to any living being. Also, her spiritual advisor is a guru cat. She protects people from police assault and other things, and then ends up being labeled a terrorist, and there's a citywide manhunt on for her. So she has to go into hiding and ends up hiding out with a bunch of sort of Occupy-like protesters in the city park. Brief summary, she ends up in the bowels of the Federal Reserve, where it seems all power is centered. We meet the soon-to-be presidential candidate, Ursula Delancey, a busybody regulator who goes around shutting down small businesses for violating various edicts and then becomes presidential candidate. And we meet the butler, a mad scientist behind the government's plan to inject everyone with a mind control drug that will cause them to love their rulers no matter what they do or say. Once the population has been properly immunized against critical thinking, they will all be sent to labor camps where they can work off their debt, which is actually the government's debt. So this is kind of, that's, the octopus creature, he's one of my favorite characters actually. He kind of represents the whole of government. And then he has these sort of cronies and apparatchiks and other people who kind of help him out. This is Ursula. She's going to be running for president. She's just put these people out of business because they didn't file the proper paperwork or something. And then this is the butler, the mad scientist who's going to come up with this potion to make everybody love the government no matter what. Meanwhile, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, it turns out that there's another young woman who has been stricken with superpowers. She fights back against police who are harassing another woman for driving. She gets really annoyed when she's listening to the news and hears about some of the atrocities committed by US military in the Middle East. She flies into a rage and decides to come to America to find the responsible parties. And let me know if I'm going too fast. I know I'm clicking through kind of quickly. She heads straight for the Federal Reserve and follows one of the octopus's henchmen to the butler's laboratory, where she runs into Kyra, the urban Yogini. The two talk, realize they have a common enemy, and decide to join forces. And they do. I'm not going to give away the ending, but there's one more. So that's book one. I'm not going to tell you how it ends. Book two is the Christmas episode, and I just wanted to introduce this one character, Cowboy Bob. He's a cowboy / economist, and he roams the countryside giving people lessons in basic economics. So here he's spending Christmas Eve in a diner, and he's talking to the guy behind the counter about proposed laws that will target price gougers. So he's explaining why that's a really bad idea and why we should let prices, fluctuate to meet demand. And that's sort of, he's kind of a side character, but I really like him. So, all right. My next book is Annabel Pickering and the Sky Pirates. That's Annabel falling out of a sky pirate ship. We all wonder what's going to happen to her. And I'll just brief introduction. Annabel is a 13-year-old girl living in an alternate Victorian world where pirate ships fly alongside passenger ships in the skies. She leads a comfortable life, her biggest worries being the school bullies, until her parents are abducted from right in front of her by the police. So this is one of the reviews. I won't read the whole thing, but it's been getting some pretty good reviews. This is from Turning Another Page. I think I might have skipped over. There was also this is a Kirkus review. Kirkus review got a good review there, and it's been getting good reviews on Amazon too. So that makes me happy. So, the issues that I raise, again, this is the first book. Some of these haven't been really developed yet, and I'm going to go into them a lot more in future books. But the issues that are raised here are, the distinction between justice and the law. What's right versus what's legal. So her parents are taken by the police, but they're not formally charged. They're taken away. Nobody knows where they are or what their crime was. And so the story is really about how do we get them back? How do we find out where they are? And she teams up with this band of sort of free-thinking scientists and researchers and academics, and who are also, connected with these sky pirates. The sky pirates are actually, they're not pirates. They're more, they're traders. They're black market traders, and they are going against the Queen's laws against trading in certain things, and also trading with certain, there are big corporations that have been granted the permission to trade in certain countries like India, China, all of that. And so these guys are part of the black market that gets around that. And so they're bringing stuff in, taking stuff out. One of the things that they do a lot of trade in is something called liquid music. And it's basically music that's stored in liquid, and you play it by putting it into a basin and it starts playing. You can ingest it, but that's really intense. And so they trade in that. That's one of their big things. Another issue is about trade. What official prohibitions and control of trade actually look like on the ground, how people are deprived of the things that they want and need, and what that means for the people who are trying to get around that, in this case, the pirates, what that enforcement actually looks like with that sort of the violence behind it. And something that I've just started to raise in book one is about the official control and manipulation of information, including our understanding of history. So this gang, one of their members is a history professor in Annabel's school. And so there's a little bit in there about how there's the official line on history, and then he tries to sort of introduce students to what actually, what the facts actually show, not what the textbooks show. But they discover in the process of the story, we discover that some historical information about some specific little things that don't seem that important have sort of been scrubbed from the history books. And so this gang is looking into that. They're also developing their own technology for storing information and sharing information. So they want to they want to keep this information that's being scrubbed, that's being manipulated. It's kind of like the Wayback Machine, but in Victorian times. And so that's one of their big missions, is to do this, is to collect information and store it in a way that it can't be tampered with and that other people can have access to it. Most importantly, though, I would say the main theme throughout the book really is more about independent thinking and just deciding for oneself what's right and wrong, and questioning what those in authority tell you is the truth, or is right, or is wrong. So that's kind of, I would say that's sort of the biggest overall theme, and that'll continue. Can I read this? Here, this is an excerpt. I can't actually read the whole thing because you guys' pictures are in front of it, but this is just an excerpt. I'll leave that up in case. The picture is from when Annabel ends up in prison. So at one point, she tries to orchestrate a prison break for her parents and fails miserably. I'm giving away plot points because as parents and teachers and people who might be passing this on to kids, I want you to know a little more than I would tell most people. That's a big giveaway. But Annabel does end up in prison. And so these are her fancy boots that she has to leave with the warden when she gets checked in. This is another excerpt. What I'm about to tell you, Miss Doubtweather. So Miss Doubtweather is this sort of odd, strange spinster who lives down the street from Annabel, and everybody knows to stay away from her because she's kind of crazy. She ends up taking Annabel under her wing when her parents are abducted. What I'm about to tell you, she says, is to be kept completely confidential. She looked again into Annabel's eyes. Do you understand that? Yes, Annabel answered, still frowning, of course. Professor Hellewig, she began, Professor Rose, your parents and I, we are all involved in a sort of informal network of, well, of scientists and philosophers and some historians, all carrying out our own work, but sharing some common interests and sometimes collaborating on projects together. As I told you before, we believe that your parents were taken because of the work we were doing together. In any case, our network, our group, extends across many countries and many cultures, and even into the world of the Queen and her court. Annabel was listening carefully, but did not quite get the spinster's meaning. What I mean to say is that we do have some friends, some well-placed people, not a great many, but a few, who are able to give information to us. Spies, Annabel exclaimed, brightening a little. And this is the dedication. I didn't put his last name in, but the sort of poem is in the book. One of the ways people communicate is through pigeons. There's a whole mail service using birds, and a sort of saying that people say as they're sending their birds off into the night or into the day or into the skies is a variation of this. So I put this up there for Ross, who hopefully one day will be free again. And then these are some links. This is me. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter as Bretigne Shaffer. My blog is www.bretigne.com. I should have, but I didn't put links up for my books. They're all on Amazon. Annabel, Pickering and the Sky Pirates, and Urban Yogini, a superhero who can't use violence. Also Urban Yogini, the Christmas episode. I also just started a podcast. My first guest was Jeff Tucker, talking about COVID-19 and liberty. What can we do? The title of my podcast is What Then Must We Do? And you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, and I've submitted it to a few others, but I'm not sure if it's up there yet. So I'll just leave that as it is for now. And then I also, a while ago, I wrote a piece for fee.org. I'm going to see if I can click on this and it comes up. There we go. 16 children's books you didn't know were anti-authoritarian. And so this is, I would just point people to this resource. If you're looking for fiction, if you're looking for literature for kids that has pro-liberty themes. I'll just scroll through this briefly, but I would just point you to this piece I did, the.org. It was on December 13th of last year. Snow Treasure. Kids in a Norwegian village have to protect the town's gold from the Nazis who are occupying. Toothpaste Millionaire. I think a lot of people are familiar with that one. Some kids get together and come up and compete with the big toothpaste magnets. Pippi Longstocking is always a good one. Charlotte's Web, again, about information and sort of being able to distinguish for yourself what's true and what's not true. More from the perspective of the people trying to fool everyone else, but still the point is made. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I think there are a lot of, there's some good pro-liberty stuff in the Harry Potter series. This one especially stands out because the kids have to get together and sort of form their own army to fight the bad guys who've taken over the government, essentially, the Ministry of Magic. Little Town on the Prairie. I would say all the Little House books, but this one just had an example that I especially liked. Three Lads and the Lizard King. This is Bob Murphy's book about three boys who have to get pulled into this fantastical world and end up fighting the Lizard King. And there are some economic lessons in there, some good principles in that story. It's also a fun story. Yertle the Turtle, a few Dr. Seuss ones. Yertle the Turtle, the Butter Battle Book, and Horton Hears a Who. I think I'll have good liberty sort of messages there. The Drinking Gourd. This is about a young boy who helps his father to get slaves across to freedom, defying the fugitive slave law. Huckleberry Finn, again, there's a whole discussion where he has to sort of come to terms himself with, is the law right, or is what I believe to be right and wrong right? What's, they're in conflict, and what am I going to do about that? The Boy Who Dared, that's based on a true story about a young man in Germany who tried to get information out during the Nazi regime. The Wizard of Oz, Pay No Attention to the Man Behind the Curtain. Hunger Games trilogy, and Winnie the Pooh, which I think is pure anarchy, and everyone should read it. So that's all I've got to say. Does anybody have any questions?
That was very nice. Appreciate that. One thing just to kind of get a little context, it's always interesting how the creative process typically works. With the books you've written, do you typically start out by having some character ideas, or you have some specific themes that you want to, and you build your whole plot and characters around the themes you're trying to impart? How does that normally unfold?
Good question. With Urban Yogini, it was just a really clear idea that wouldn't it be great to have, I've got a 13-year-old son, and so we watch a lot of superhero movies. And I just thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to have a superhero who was actually fighting the state? And then I started thinking about, I have studied yoga, and there are a lot of themes that sort of meshed well with, I thought, with that idea. So that was just a really clear idea. With Annabel Pickering, again, it was kind of the whole idea that came to me, and then I started sort of putting the pieces together. I guess the spinster came to me first, and I started building a story around her and her motives, around the whole idea of sort of trying to collect all the things that are good about what humanity has created and protect that. So but as I go, things also just sort of it sort of takes on a life of its own. So some of the characters kind of just appeared, and I feel like, oh well, okay, it's clear that you belonged here, so you gotta stay here. So, but I would say, yeah, for these, it was just a clear idea at the outset.
Very, very nice. David, I see you've got your hand up.
Hi, Bretigne.
Hi.
I'm an aspiring anti-authoritarian fiction author,
Awesome.
and pretty good at nonfiction, but I have realized how important storytelling is to both fiction and nonfiction. So how did you build your storytelling skills? Did you start with fiction or nonfiction first?
Well, I was a nonfiction writer for many years. So I was a journalist beginning, when did I start? I mean, not including college, but I guess professionally I started being a journalist in 88. Yes, it was 88. So yeah, so I wrote, you know, straight news pieces, mostly sort of on economic topics, on political and economic topics, also op-ed pieces. And I did that. That was sort of what I did for many, many years. And I also sort of came to the realization, you know, yes, I don't want to discount doing that, and I still do it. But there's a piece missing. It's like if someone doesn't have sort of a fundamental feeling for liberty or care about it, then, you know, all the journalism in the world isn't going to, it might convince some people, but it's not going to convince the people who just don't have that internal sort of feeling about it. So yeah, I started out doing nonfiction, and it's not an easy transition, because as a fiction writer, you know, there's a tendency to want to, when you're doing an article, it's like you want to get all the facts in there. You want to get all the information in there and not leave any stone unturned, not miss anything that you could say. But in fiction, you can't, I don't think you can do that and do a good job of it, of fiction, because if what you're constructing is an argument, it's not going to feel real. It's not going to come across as good fiction. So you have to be willing to not address everything, and also to not have your characters be right all the time. You know, that's a big beef that I have with Ayn Rand, is her characters, it's just not credible. They're not, they're a bit more like sort of Soviet realist characters than someone that I think most people would relate to. And I want to avoid doing that. I want to avoid having it be a piece of propaganda, or having it be something that's, you know, that's only presenting the best of my side and not really presenting the other side from their point of view. And that's kind of, I think that's, even in journalism, you have to do that too. But yeah, it's tough, because you have to kind of, you have to be willing to write things that aren't necessarily serving your agenda, or but that's also true of journalism. It's just it's tough. I wish I had a better answer, but it's not necessarily an easy transition. And I think things like doing writing exercises and stream of consciousness exercises and those things are actually really helpful in moving across from nonfiction writing to fiction writing, because you kind of have to let your imagination just be able to play.
So short stories might be a good place to start.
Yeah, and even just writing for yourself, just like vignettes or things where you don't even necessarily need for anyone else to ever see them, or even to have it be a complete story, but just doing a lot of exercises where you're kind of writing from a different place, where you sort of writing more poetry or observations about things that have nothing to do with politics or nothing to do with, you know, what you usually write about. Just, you know, kind of give yourself permission to write crazy stuff that nobody else is ever going to see, and just get your imagination moving. But yeah, short stories. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's very helpful. I think Charles has a question.
I was just saying before, though, real quick, the one thing when you mentioned that about Ayn Rand, in Atlas Shrugged, there's a great part where I think it runs like a better part of a page or more, where she's just describing a cloud, and the visual is so fantastic.
I think I remember that.
and the visual is so fantastic, and you're thinking, and that's kind of what made me think of that when you started describing how you write from a different place, because it had like nothing to do with what the book is all about, but yet it was a chance just to stretch out that visual creativity. So that's a great suggestion. Charles,
I had to read her nonfiction stuff before I got the full gist of the intellectual content.
There you go. Charles, I do see your hand up.
Yes, and Brittany, fantastic presentation. This is a great topic, and by coincidence, my kids right now are watching Horton Hears a Who.
Awesome.
So hoping they'll derive some libertarian knowledge from that experience. We just want to remind folks, Jeff, if you want to show that Bright Eon page again, we had 3 presenters that sort of built on what we're seeing today. If you scroll down just a bit, Paul Cantor, our UVA professor, presented on liberty via literature. So you're sort of an extension of his presentation for those who want to look at that. A while ago, Kerry McDonald, also at FEE, the Foundation of Economic Education, presented on CPS, Child Protective Service threats to parents who think independently on education or healthcare. And to that threat for independent thinking, I wrote a couple of notes from your books on urban Yogini. You mentioned a vaccine that the villain injects into the populace to get some love. I guess this is so relevant to today because, as well as your theme of smuggling and Sky Pirates, and then you mentioned allusion to Hunger Games, because it seems like we're going to go to a Hunger Games society where without your vaccine, you don't have permission to travel or do certain things. And then with your mention of smuggling Sky Pirates, it seems with FDA and CDC roadblocks, it's tough to get some pretty good treatments out there that President Trump is touting, like that hydrochloroquine or just basic vitamin C drips at hospitals. What are your thoughts about the relevance of both of your stories to this pandemic recession chaos that we're facing right now, with smuggling for treatments and vaccines to make it all go away?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. There are a lot of things, especially in Urban Yogini, because that's more like explicitly about U.S. politics, in this day and age. I wrote it in 2014 and 2015. I feel like it's incredibly relevant. I mean, I look back at it now and it's like, yeah, the whole, trying to vaccinate the whole population so that they'll go along with everything, everything we say. The president, so there's also stuff in it about the presidential race and how that turns out. But the whole thing of, trying to silence information, I feel like that's, I wrote about it back then. It's always been an issue, but I feel like it is so much coming to a head right now that, for those who recognize it anyway, it's like that's kind of at the core of everything that's going on, is the desire of the state to control information, to control what we believe is true, and then to pass draconian laws or just engage in draconian acts more easily, because people do believe that what they're presenting is the truth. So yeah, I think it's hugely relevant. Annabel Pickering also, I mean, again, I started writing it like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I think 6 years ago. And really had no idea how relevant the whole idea of preserving information and preserving the truth and getting it out to people, finding ways to transmit that information. Again, it's always been an issue. Throughout history, it's been an issue, but it's kind of the issue right now. Hard to say that in the middle of this crisis, but it's like it's at the center of all the other issues. It's so connected to everything else that's going on, and I feel like I've gotten this story started with Annabel that is really going to become in book 2 is going to become even more kind of relevant to our world in terms of the whole information question. But yeah, also, I mean, you mentioned smuggling and trying to get around prohibitions, you know, trying to get around the requirement that everybody, because that is what they're going for. And they've even said so. I mean, Bill Gates has pretty much said that in his Reddit talk, that they want everyone to be able to show your disease status and vaccine status. And if you don't, you know, you can't get on that airplane. You can't, you know, maybe shop in in stores. There's going to be all kinds of things you won't be able to do. And so there's first of all, there's a need to fight that at the information level, and every other level. But there's also going to be a need, there already is a need for underground medicine. There needs to be an underground medicine network. Maybe network's not the right word, movement, because, you know, access to things like IV vitamin C, you know, that it just came out today. You know, and a lot of people have been pushing the story about vitamin C, how it's being used in China to treat COVID-19, how there are studies showing how effective it is against viruses and bacterial infections. You know, there's sound science backing vitamin C up, and yet the FDA has tried to stifle it. They tried to stifle information about it. They've restricted, and I'm not clear on exactly what the restriction was, but restricted access to IV vitamin C. And now there's also sort of a media crackdown. You know, people have had Facebook posts, quote unquote, fact checked for promoting vitamin C against the coronavirus, against COVID-19. And then just today it comes out that some hospitals in New York City are starting to give patients vitamin C for COVID-19. So this is a real war. This is a real battle for freedom of information in medicine. It's also a real battle for the freedom to engage in whatever medical treatments you want to. Those aren't specific issues that I deal with in my books, but I will say, in the back of my head, when I've been planning my next Urban Yogini book, it was going to, you know, a few years ago, it was always going to be about medical freedom. That it's just, you know, in our circles, a lot of people already know that, but I think that even outside of our circles, people are going to start to see that a lot more clearly.
Hopefully so, because for sure it's seemingly lost in plain sight. You know, everyone's just rushing around, but no one's really noticing this closing window of information, as it were, like you're describing, sadly. Mm-hmm. David, I see your hand there.
Bretigne, are you familiar with The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible by Ken Schooland?
Yes, I've met him, and I read it a long time ago, really enjoyed it, because he wrote that. It's been like over 10 years, right? It was a while ago.
I think longer than that.
Yeah, I think longer than that.
95.
95. That sounds about right. Yeah, I read it many years ago. Really enjoyed it. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the Tuttle Twins, which is more of a sort of, it's more of a homeschooling series directed at kids, you know, dealing with a specific topic or a specific theme each time. But I really enjoy those too.
I believe that Ken Schooland's book has been translated into 30-some languages. So,
wow! I think I didn't know.
And it's basically an Austrian economics parable, but I hear good things about the Tuttle Twins too.
Yeah, that's great that it's in 30-some languages, because this isn't, you know, we tend to sort of, at least I do, think of this as sort of an American problem, or, you know, focus more on my own culture, but these issues are relevant around the world, and the more we can get it out in other languages, the better.
Charles?
Thanks. A couple things here. Bretigne, do you think, you know, more popular versions of your Liberty books, like Hunger Games, to what do you attribute its popularity, or was it pushed in some way? And if a libertarian book like that or others have been so successful, why don't more millennials and young folks have more liberty-based views? That's one question. We can talk about that, and I'll have another question after that, Jess.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to say, I really don't know. So when I haven't read the Hunger Games books. I've just seen the films. But my husband read them and told me that they're basically pretty much aligned. But when I saw them, I was shocked. I was shocked, not that they'd been made, but that they were so popular, that this had really taken off. And so I think part of it is just the dystopian nature of it. Dystopianism is popular. Apocalyptic themes are popular. So it might not necessarily be that people reading them are identifying with the libertarianness of it or with the anti-state message. But I don't know. I mean, with those books in particular, I find it hard to imagine that somebody could really love those books and not get what it's about, not realize that this is a message about, the whole thing is about, the dangers of an all-powerful state. And with a lot of sort of specific things that are very relatable to in terms of our own society. So I don't know. And I probably don't talk with enough millennials to have a good sense, like the young, I have to say young people now, the young people that I talk with, that I know, are all pretty clued in, but that's my circle. I mean, I don't really, and I think as a writer, one thing I need to do is get more in touch with the generation of kids and young people who I'm writing for, because the ones I know are all kind of in my circles. And so I'm encouraged by what I see. I see a lot of independent thinking. I see a lot of reasonableness and sort of responsibility. I see a lot of responsible, not at all sort of the stereotype that you hear about. So my answer is just, I don't know. I like to think that there's a large body of, at their heart, pro-liberty people and kids especially there, and that we're not hearing so much from them because of how much the media is manipulated. And one example was there was a piece, I think in the Washington Post like last week, really a smear piece of the whole sort of patriot community, the people who believe very strongly in the Second Amendment, who are worried about government overreach, who want to protect their families. It was this whole smear piece, as if they haven't been smeared enough, but it was a big smear piece about them, about, what crazy, silly people they are and how really they're the danger, not this overbearing government that can turn off your electricity at its whim, which is what the LA mayor just announced today, by the way. He just said that, I don't know if you saw this, but he threatened to have the Los Angeles water and power shut off for, quote, non-essential businesses. So, the idea that the Washington Post is more frightened of a bunch of people who just want to defend their own families than they are of that tells me that the media is living in a completely different world from certainly most of the people I know. And I'd like to think most ordinary people. So I guess that's a sort of a long-winded way of saying I hope that there are a lot of liberty-minded people out there, whether they call themselves that or not, and that a lot of what we see in the media is what certain interest groups want us to see.
Sounds a little bit more like the latter there, and then we know with everybody's kind of in their own little bubble, as it were. So you're getting to see all those liberty-minded people, and all the ones that don't think about liberty never get to interact with people that do. They just get in their own little vacuum. So I'm sure there's plenty of them out there, like you said, but they're just shielded from it, so they don't even come to that realizations. But we'll see as time proceeds. Charles, what's the second half of your question there?
Thanks. And first, a correction on past Bretigne webinars we've hosted last fall. We also had the Independent Institute president David Thoreau on a talk on C.S. Lewis and Tolkien on their contributions to liberty. So we've done a fair number of these fiction pathways to liberty. I think it is a critical path to explore and grow. But my other question was the Yogini part of your first book, Yoga. We do coincidentally have as our guest on our other webinar on the cash patient market that we're creating, Kundalini Yoga as an important part of medicine and building your immunity tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can just register at yourfreedomhub.com/Kundalini Yoga Medicine. What do you think about the importance of yoga and meditation, Brittany, in this crazy, stressful time?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important. I'm lucky. My yoga studio is doing video classes now. Yeah, I just posted on my blog today about just a tweet that I had seen yesterday. Someone said, in the last 5 days, there are 2 people they know of who've died from heart attacks. And, maybe that would have happened without all of this, but it's clear to me that, I think it's clear to everyone that this has raised the stress levels of pretty much everyone. So I think anything that that can help combat that and that can help people, my experience with yoga and with meditation is that it gets you to a place of feeling less like a victim and more sort of in touch with your strength. I would say that whatever strength you have to deal with the circumstances that you're presented with, and whatever strength you have to help other people around you, you can get in touch with that strength by doing certain things. And yoga is certainly one of them. Meditation, a lot of breathing work, but also getting outside. Doing garden work. There are things you can do, and I think it's extremely important right now to be doing these things that really ground us and get us grounded in our physical reality and take us away from the panic. And I don't mean avoiding the information or avoiding the situation or what needs to be done, but you can either deal with it from a state of panic and fear, or you can deal with it from a state of really being more grounded and being more just not driven by fear, driven by a sense of strength and of what you can actually do to make things better. So yeah, I think it's not, it's a physical practice, but it is a spiritual practice too. And it's a practice that affects your whole outlook on life. And, it helps keep you physically more healthy, but it also just helps to bring you to a place of being more grounded and more able to deal with crises.
What a perfect way to conclude our discussion today on a nice, hopeful thought and a meditative one at that. So, Brittany, I want to thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.